In a move that surprised absolutely no one, Whitehouse spokesperson Jen Psaki announced the US will not be sending any diplomats to attend the Beijing Winter Games next February, citing human rights abuses in a place we've never heard of. 金钟? 他好像自己有点紧张吧? But what is the real reason behind these boycott calls? 大家好，欢迎回到外媒看中国，我是安博仁。Let's get reporting. The White House announced today that, as expected, the US will diplomatically boycott the upcoming Beijing 2022 Winter Games, citing egregious human rights abuses and atrocities in Xinjiang, a place she can't even pronounce properly. Let's take a quick look.
U.S. diplomatic or official representation would treat these games as business as usual in the face of the PRC's egregious human rights abuses and atrocities in Xinjiang, and we simply can't do that.
This move, while designed as a way to virtue signal to US citizens who wholeheartedly believe the false premise of genocide going on in Xinjiang, and also as a way for US officials to get out of having to remain inside the strictly controlled Olympics bubble in order to keep China free of COVID, will now regrettably cement into Olympic history the false idea that mass human rights abuses are taking place in Xinjiang. Although it was interesting to note that Psaki seemed to try her best to avoid the G word, most likely because the White House is acutely aware that no genocide is actually underway in China. It was all but a foregone conclusion that the US would boycott Beijing 2022 in this way. In fact, it's just been a waiting game for today's announcement. I appeared on CGTN's The Point with Liu Xin last week to discuss the politicization of the Games by the US and how this type of political grandstanding is nothing new. Now Tibet is no longer all the rage, I guess. It's not a trendy cause anymore. So now the Western media is focusing on Xinjiang, like you said, mass incarcerations, genocide, which was downgraded to cultural genocide, supposed slave labor in the cotton fields. All of these things have been discredited to a large degree, but they still keep pushing it. So I think now we're seeing the same methodology. It's just different targets. So whereas before they may have been trying to hurt Xinjiang's cotton industry, for example, and now they're aiming for a Olympic boycott. So I think it's the same old thing, just a new target. Last night, in anticipation of the US announcement, Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman Zhao Lijian reminded US political elites that, well, no one gives a crap if they come or not.
那些叫嚷抵制的政客为了政治私利作秀炒作，他们来或者不来，没有人会在意。
Of course, the Western mainstream media were quick to pounce after Psaki's announcement today, producing report after report on the announcement in their usual unbalanced manner. They also used the opportunity to mount pressure on other governments to follow suit with the US and also boycott the Games. The hope is that Washington's leadership here will embolden allies in Europe and perhaps Australia to do the same, one US China watcher argued. A common position among democracies will send a significantly stronger message about the unacceptable nature of China's abuses than a singular US effort that Beijing will seek to dismiss as a gimmick driven by US rivalry with China. As you just saw, US eyes are now firmly on the Australian government with hopes that Prime Minister Scott Morrison will be next to announce a diplomatic boycott. This morning I asked Hazza, an Australian presenter with Guangdong Radio and Television, if he thinks Australia will follow suit.
In Australia, something similar might happen, where they decide not to send any government officials, but I'm sure that the Australian athletes will still be allowed to attend.
And so what do you think the impact would be of a diplomatic Australian boycott if it did go through?
Look, I think relations between Australia and China are already strained enough. I think that if we were to boycott the Winter Games in any way, it would just add unnecessary pressure to the already fragile relationship.
One of the real reasons the US is so keen to boycott the Games diplomatically this time, in my opinion, is that they won't be able to leave the quarantine bubble for the entire time they're in China, which means they won't be able to use the opportunity to politically grandstand while here. There were also calls for the US to diplomatically boycott the Beijing 2008 Summer Games, shock horror, but then President George Bush ignored those calls so that he could attend the strategically timed opening of a new US embassy in Beijing, an event he used, you guessed it, to politically grandstand. All people should have the freedom to say what they think and worship as they choose, he said, highlighting US ignorance of China. Next year's Winter Games are a world first in that the entire event, from arriving in Beijing to accommodation, to training, to eating, to competing, takes place inside a secure quarantine bubble, which will ensure the country can keep its 1.4 billion citizens safe from imported COVID infections. That means that diplomats' movements will be strictly controlled, and they'll have to remain inside that bubble, meaning they wouldn't be able to trot around China as they see fit, finding more opportunities to cause trouble. So were you surprised by the US finally announcing a diplomatic boycott of Beijing 2022? And do you think it even matters? Let me know what you think down below, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.